7 years ago, a Republican president, supported by both Republicans and Democrats in Congress, lent new meaning to the term March Madness. Commencing an undeclared, unconstitutional, illegal, and immoral war of conquest against another sovereign nation that had never attacked our country. 4 years later, the Democratic Party won a majority in Congress and nothing changed. The bloody and illegal occupation continued. 2 years after that, a Democratic president, supported by both Republicans and Democrats in Congress, has not only continued that bloody and illegal occupation, he has expanded another bloody, illegal, and immoral occupation in Afghanistan, and he has stepped up attacks on a third sovereign nation, Pakistan, with no accountability whatsoever. Now, I don't know about you, but the logical conclusion that I draw from this experience is that maybe we need new representation in Washington from a new political party or two. Now, because the corporate media in this country doesn't cover Iraq as much these days, and because the killing of American soldiers has become more sporadic, one might be tempted to think that the war isn't as great of a problem anymore. However, I remind you, and this is very important, that simply because the corporate media, the five giant conglomerates that control most of the news that most Americans are propagandized with, decide not to cover or feature something, it doesn't mean that the underlying issue has gone away. The fact remains that the occupation is still wrong, it is still illegal, it is still a foreign occupation of another sovereign nation whose people overwhelmingly do not want us in their country, any more than we would like it if another country's army occupied our own. The promise that Barack Obama ran upon of withdrawing all quote-unquote combat troops from Iraq, even that promise, which was deceptive, apparently is about to go by the wayside. But how do you quantify the suffering caused by the death of a husband, or wife, or mother, or father, or the loss of a limb, or an eye, or your sanity? How do you measure a lifetime of nightmares? Some of the costs of war simply cannot be quantified. On the economic side, to date, over $1 trillion have been allocated to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And these appropriations do not even count the surge of 30,000 additional troops to Afghanistan announced a few months ago by the Obama administration. Conservative estimates of that are going to add another $30 billion to the price tag of these wars. But the long-term costs to society are even higher when you figure in past and future medical costs, losses due to injury and disability, interest on the debt, future borrowing for war expenses, the cost of a continued military presence in Iraq, and lifetime health care and counseling for veterans. Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz calculates the ultimate cost of these wars as somewhere between $5 and $7 trillion. Now you might well ask, I'm running for governor of Illinois, what does this have to do with state government? How is this an issue for me? Well, for one thing, I'm concerned about it simply as a human being and as a citizen who cares about what my federal government is doing, carrying out a murderous foreign policy in our name at our expense. Second, there is a direct impact on our state. Just taking the actual direct costs of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, Illinois taxpayers have paid $56.7 billion in this war spending since 2001. That's enough to have eliminated our structural deficit more than 4 times over, the same thing that is costing us and causing cutbacks to our colleges and universities and our social services and our K-12 schools and our local governments. Don't you think we could have used this money here at home? Unfortunately, over the years, as ambitious corporate interests gained power and influence over our government, and our government in turn began intruding into the affairs of other nations, the state militias gradually became more federalized as the so-called National Guard. And the purpose of the National Guard itself became perverted from a purely defensive purpose to becoming a tool of the same corporate-driven quest to dominate other nations. But we have to remind ourselves it's called the National Guard, not the National Occupation Force. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan are unconstitutional and are illegal under international laws and treaties to which the United States is a signatory. And under the principles of the Charter of the Nuremberg Tribunal, which our government once championed, as a government official, I would have a responsibility not to commit or further an act which constitutes a crime under international law. The Nuremberg principles further state that complicity in the commission of a crime against peace, a war crime, or a crime against humanity is a crime under international law, and being a responsible government official does not relieve that person of responsibility under international law. In short, under the Nuremberg principles, as I'm sure many of you have heard before, an officer has a duty to disobey an illegal order to commit a crime against peace or a war crime. On that basis, if elected governor, I will veto and resist any order of the federal government to commit Illinois state militia troops to fight an illegal and unconstitutional war of aggression in Iraq or Afghanistan. The mission of the National Guard is to guard this nation, not to occupy another one. In Iraq, the parody of democracy, so-called free elections at the point of a gun, has led to Iraqis being forced to swallow rampant privatization, foreign corporate ownership of resources and industry, and most recently, forced to accept a loan from the World Bank by one of the most oil-rich countries in the world. But you know, as pessimistic as this picture seems right now, there is one cause for optimism. And that is this: despite all the propaganda we have been deluged with to accept and even support these wars, most of the American people are already on our side. This is another instance in which the corporate media don't want you to know or think about the truth, and they work hard to obscure it. There are more of us than even we know. We are the majority. The fundamental disconnect between what the people need, demand, and want on the one hand, and what their so-called representatives, their fake representatives, bought and paid for by the corporate and banking special interests actually deliver on the other. And why does this disconnect exist? It's very simple. Because the people of the United States have been conditioned to go along with this false belief that they have to vote for one of the two corporate-sponsored parties. The solution, or at least the beginning of a solution, is also very simple. Stop doing it. You all know the definition of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Voting for the seeming good Democrat for president in 2008 and seeing the results right now, more war, not less, should hopefully shatter that final illusion. We the people are more powerful than we know. We the people, remember, are the fourth branch of government, the source of power of the other three branches. We created this system and we have the power to change it. But first, we have to stop voting for the people who don't represent us and start voting for those who do. Don't just protest the wars. Start organizing to win the peace. Start organizing to reclaim your government. This November, stop voting for more war, stop voting to keep in power those who exploit you, and start voting for your party and for your own interests. Thank you.